Ben Torres stood at the large window of transport ship Aurora, watching the space station grow larger as they approached. Harmony Point looked like a giant metal flower floating in the darkness of space. Its silver petals stretched out in all directions, each section built to house different alien species. Ben had never seen anything like it before. He adjusted his blue uniform and checked his communication device one more time. The small screen showed his assignment details. Cultural Exchange Program. Escort Mission. Companion Assignment. The words made his stomach feel nervous. Ben was good with technology and languages, but he had never worked directly with aliens before. "First time at Harmony Point?" asked Captain Reed, walking up beside him. "Yes, sir," Ben replied. "First time working with non-humans too." Captain Reed smiled. "You will do fine. The Terran Defense Force chose you for a reason. Your language skills are excellent, and your communication reports are always clear and helpful." Ben nodded, but he still felt worried. He had studied alien languages in school, but studying and actually talking were very different things. The transport ship docked with a soft bump, and Ben gathered his small bag of belongings. The docking bay of Harmony Point was huge and filled with beings Ben had only seen in pictures. Tall, thin creatures with purple skin walked next to small, round aliens covered in soft fur. Flying beings with rainbow wings moved through the air above them. Ben tried not to stare, but everything was so different and amazing. A human officer approached him. "Specialist Torres. I am Commander Walsh. Welcome to Harmony Point." "Thank you, sir," Ben said, saluting. "Walk with me. I will explain your mission while we go to the meeting room." Commander Walsh started walking toward a wide corridor. "The Zephyrian Empire has agreed to participate in our cultural exchange program. This is the first time they have worked directly with humans or any other species." Ben listened carefully as they walked. The corridor walls were made of a strange material that seemed to change color as they passed. Other beings moved around them, speaking in languages Ben had never heard before. "Your companion is named Kira," Commander Walsh continued. "She is young for her species, but she knows several Earth languages. The Zephyrians communicate mainly through sound frequencies that are different from human speech." They stopped outside a door marked with symbols Ben did not recognize. Commander Walsh pressed his hand on a panel, and the door opened with a musical sound. "Remember, Torres, this exchange program is very important for human relations with the Zephyrian Empire. They control several systems that have resources we need for our colonies. Be respectful and patient." The room was different from any human room Ben had ever seen. The walls curved upward like the inside of an egg, and soft light came from everywhere without any visible source. The air felt warm and slightly humid, and Ben could hear a gentle humming sound. In the center of the room sat a being unlike anything Ben had imagined. Kira was about the size of a human child, but her body seemed to be made of living crystal. Her skin was translucent and reflected light in beautiful patterns. She had 4 arms and legs that ended in delicate fingers and toes. Her head was round with large, dark eyes that sparkled like stars. When Kira saw them enter, she stood up gracefully. Her body made soft musical tones as she moved, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Kira, this is Specialist Ben Torres," Commander Walsh said slowly and clearly. "Ben, this is Kira of the Zephyrian Empire." Ben stepped forward and tried to remember the greeting he had learned. He placed his hands together and bowed slightly. "It is an honor to meet you, Kira." Kira made a series of musical sounds that rose and fell like a song. The translation device on Ben's belt made electronic beeping sounds, then spoke in a flat, mechanical voice, "Greetings are acknowledged. Purpose of meeting is understood." Ben frowned. The translation sounded wrong somehow. Kira's musical communication had been beautiful and complex, but the translation was simple and cold. Commander Walsh looked at his watch. "I will leave you both to get acquainted. Your first assignment briefing is in 2 hours. The meeting room is marked on your map device. After the commander left, Ben and Kira looked at each other uncertainly. Ben tried to think of something to say that would help them start working together. I hope we can be good partners, Ben said. The translation device beeped and spoke to Kira. She responded with more musical sounds, but this time they seemed shorter and less melodic. The device translated, "Cooperation will occur as required." Ben felt disappointed. Kira's response seemed unfriendly, but he wondered if the translation was missing something important. He decided to try a different approach. "Can you tell me about your home world?" Ben asked. Kira's musical response was longer this time, with many different tones and rhythms. The translation device struggled for several seconds before speaking. Home location has standard planetary characteristics. Climate and geography are adequate for species survival. Ben knew that translation was completely wrong. Kira's communication had been rich and full of emotion, but the device made it sound like a boring scientific report. He looked at Kira's large eyes and saw something there that might have been sadness or frustration. Ben pulled out his tablet computer and began checking the translation software settings. "I think our translation system might not be working correctly," he said. Kira watched him work and made a soft questioning sound. The translation device said, "Query about technical difficulties." "Yes, exactly," Ben said, looking up at her. "Your real communication sounds beautiful, but the translation makes it sound very different." For the first time, Kira's crystalline face seemed to change expression. Her eyes grew brighter, and her body made a gentle chiming sound. The translation device said, "Surprise and interest detected." Ben spent the next hour trying to adjust the translation settings, but nothing seemed to help. The device could translate the basic meaning of Kira's musical language, but it missed all the emotion and personality. Ben began to feel frustrated and worried about their mission. Kira seemed to sense his frustration. She moved closer to him and made a series of very soft, gentle sounds. Even though Ben did not understand the words, the tone was clearly meant to be comforting. "Thank you," Ben said quietly. "I wish I could understand you better." Kira tilted her head to one side, studying Ben's face. She made a few experimental sounds, changing the pitch and rhythm. Ben realized she was trying to copy the emotional tone of his voice. "That's interesting," Ben said. "You are not just listening to my words. You are listening to how I say them." Kira's body began to glow softly, which Ben guessed meant she was excited or happy. She made more sounds that seemed to match the feeling in Ben's voice. Ben had an idea. He began to speak to Kira without using the translation device. Instead, he focused on putting clear emotions into his voice. When he spoke in a happy tone, Kira's body glowed brighter. When he spoke sadly, her light became dimmer and her sounds became lower. "You understand emotions better than words," Ben said with wonder. They spent time practicing this emotional communication. Ben would speak in different tones, curious, excited, worried, friendly, and Kira would respond with matching musical sounds. They were beginning to understand each other in a way that had nothing to do with the translation device. Their practice was interrupted when Ben's stomach made a loud rumbling sound. He laughed and put his hand on his stomach. "Sorry, I have not eaten since this morning." Kira made a quick series of sounds that the translation device interpreted as, "Nutrition requirements acknowledged." But Ben heard something different in her tone. There was amusement there, and maybe curiosity. Kira had never heard a human stomach rumble before. Ben opened his bag and pulled out a nutrition bar. As he unwrapped it, he began humming a tune his grandmother used to sing to him when he was small. It was a simple melody that always made him feel comfortable and safe. The moment Ben started humming, Kira became completely still. Her large eyes focused on him with intense attention. Then, very slowly, she began to make soft musical sounds that matched the rhythm of his humming. Ben stopped humming and listened in amazement. Kira was not just copying his tune, she was adding to it. Her sounds wove around his melody, creating harmony that made the simple song incredibly beautiful. Without thinking, Ben began humming again. Kira joined him immediately, and together they created music unlike anything either of them had ever heard. Ben's human voice and Kira's crystalline tones blended perfectly, each making the other sound better. When the song ended, they both sat in silence for a moment. Ben felt like something important had just happened, though he was not sure what it was. "That was incredible," Ben said softly. Kira's entire body was glowing now, brighter than Ben had seen before. Her musical response was complex and layered, full of excitement and joy. Even though the translation device said only, "positive experience confirmed," Ben could hear much more in her actual sounds. "I think we just discovered something important," Ben said. "Music might be the real universal language." Kira made questioning sounds, and Ben tried to explain his idea. "Words get lost in translation, but emotions in music come through clearly. When we made music together, I could feel what you were feeling." Ben pulled out his tablet and began making notes about their discovery. As he wrote, he hummed softly without realizing it. Kira began adding her harmonies again, and soon they were creating another beautiful song. This time, Ben noticed that Kira's musical additions seemed to respond to his emotions as he wrote. When he felt excited about an idea, her harmonies became brighter and more complex. When he felt uncertain, her sounds became gentler and more supportive. "You are reading my emotions through my humming," Ben said with amazement. "And I can understand your emotions through your music." They were interrupted by a communication from Ben's tablet. Their first assignment briefing was in 30 minutes. Ben looked at his notes and realized they had discovered something that could change how humans and aliens communicated with each other. "Kira, I think our real mission is not just about cultural exchange," Ben said carefully. "I think we are supposed to find new ways for different species to understand each other." Kira's response was a long, complex musical phrase that the translation device could not handle at all. It simply said, "Translation error. Complex emotional content detected." But Ben did not need a translation. He could hear in Kira's music that she agreed with him. More than that, he could hear that she was excited about the possibility of helping species understand each other better. Ben stood up and gathered his things. "Come on, partner. Let us go to this briefing and see what they really want us to do." As they left the room together, Ben began humming again. Kira joined in with her harmonies, and their combined music echoed beautifully through the curved corridors of Harmony Point. Other beings stopped to listen as they passed, drawn by the unusual and beautiful sound. Ben noticed that their music seemed to affect other aliens in positive ways. Tense-looking beings relaxed when they heard the harmonies. Groups that had been arguing quietly stopped their disagreements to listen. "Kira," Ben said as they walked, "I think our music does not just help us understand each other. It helps everyone who hears it feel more peaceful." Kira's response was a gentle, affirming melody that seemed to say she had noticed the same thing. Ben felt a growing excitement about their mission. They were not just two beings learning to communicate, they were discovering something that could help bring different species together in ways that had never been possible before. As they approached the briefing room, Ben could hear voices speaking in multiple alien languages, and the sound suggested tension and disagreement. He looked at Kira and smiled. "Ready to show them what real communication looks like?" he asked. Kira's musical response was confident and determined. Even without translation, Ben knew she was ready for whatever came next. Together, they entered the briefing room where their real work was about to begin. The briefing room was large and filled with beings from many different worlds. Ben counted at least 8 different species sitting around a circular table that seemed to glow with its own soft light. The air was thick with tension, and multiple conversations were happening at once in languages Ben had never heard before. At the head of the table sat Commander Walsh along with a tall, elegant being with silver skin and 4 arms. This was Ambassador Vex from the Andorian Republic, according to the information Ben had studied on his tablet. Next to them was a small, furry creature with large ears who kept making clicking sounds, a representative from the Squeakin' Alliance. Specialist Torres, please take a seat, Commander Walsh said, gesturing to two empty chairs. We were just discussing the communication challenges we have been facing. As Ben and Kira sat down, Ben noticed that every species had their own translation device. The small machines were working constantly, beeping and buzzing as they tried to convert one language into another. But the translations seemed to be causing more confusion than understanding. Ambassador Vex was speaking in a melodic language that sounded like singing. Their translation device converted this into flat, mechanical words. Previous agreements require clarification regarding resource allocation protocols. The Squeakin representative responded with rapid clicking sounds. Their translator said, disagreement exists regarding interpretation of previous statements. Ben watched the faces around the table and saw frustration growing. It was clear that the basic meaning of words was being translated, but something important was being lost. What exactly are the communication problems? Ben asked. A blue-skinned being with tentacles instead of arms gestured toward the center of the table. 3 weeks ago, we thought we had reached an agreement about sharing medical knowledge. But when we tried to put the agreement into action, we discovered that we all understood it differently. Commander Walsh nodded grimly. The healing arts exchange was supposed to be our first major success. Instead, it has created new conflicts. Each species interpreted the same translated words to mean different things. Kira had been listening quietly, but now she made a series of musical sounds. Her translation device said, "Question about emotional context in original communications." The room fell silent. Most of the beings had never heard a Zephyrian speak before, and Kira's natural musical language was beautiful even through the mechanical translator. "What does emotional context mean?" asked the tentacled being, whose name was Dr. Reef according to their identification badge. Ben looked at Kira, then at the group around the table. "Kira and I have discovered something important about communication. We think the problem is not with the words being translated, but with everything else that gets lost." "Everything else?" Ambassador Vex asked, their 4 eyes focusing on Ben. Ben stood up and walked to the center of the room. "May I demonstrate? I need 2 volunteers who speak different languages." Dr. Reef and the Squeakin representative, whose name was Pip, agreed to help. Ben asked Dr. Reef to say something simple in their own language, without using the translator. Dr. Reef spoke in a flowing, wave-like language that sounded like ocean currents. Their tone was warm and friendly, and their tentacles moved gracefully as they spoke. "Now, Pip, please respond in your language," Ben said. Pip made a series of quick, cheerful clicks that reminded Ben of birds singing. "Neither of you understood the words," Ben said, "but did you understand anything else?" Dr. Reef's tentacles moved thoughtfully. Pip sounded happy and welcoming. "I felt like they were being friendly." "Yes." Pip clicked excitedly. Dr. Reef sounded kind and peaceful. "I wanted to be friends with them." Ben smiled. "Exactly. You understood the emotions and intentions, even without words. But watch what happens when we use the translators." Ben asked them to repeat the same sentences using their translation devices. This time, Dr. Reef's warm greeting became, "Standard acknowledgement of presence is offered." Pip's cheerful response became, "Reciprocal acknowledgement is provided." The translators killed all the emotion, Ben explained. They turned friendly greetings into cold, mechanical exchanges. Commander Walsh leaned forward with interest. "Are you suggesting that our translation technology is the source of our communication problems?" Before Ben could answer, Kira began to make musical sounds. Instead of waiting for her translator, Ben listened carefully to the tone and rhythm of her communication. He could hear curiosity, excitement, and a desire to help. "Kira is asking if she can show you something," Ben said. "She does not want to use her translator. She wants to communicate directly." Kira nodded and began to create a complex musical piece. Her sounds rose and fell like a beautiful song, but Ben could hear that it was more than music. There were questions in the high notes, suggestions in the middle tones, and supportive feelings in the lower sounds. As Kira's music filled the room, something remarkable happened. The tension that had been thick in the air began to fade. The beings around the table relaxed their postures. Dr. Reef's tentacles swayed gently in rhythm with the music. Pip's ears moved in time with the melody. When Kira finished, the room was silent for a moment. "I did not understand her words," Ambassador Vex said slowly, "but I understood her meaning. She was asking if we could work together to solve this problem. She was offering to help us understand each other better." "How is that possible?" Dr. Reef asked in wonder. Ben felt excited as he explained their discovery. "Kira and I learned that emotional communication works across species barriers. When we focus on how we say things instead of just what we say, understanding becomes much deeper." Over the next hour, Ben and Kira worked with the group to demonstrate their communication method. They had each species speak in their natural language while focusing on expressing clear emotions: happiness, curiosity, concern, friendship. Even without translation, the basic emotional messages came through clearly. Then Ben had an idea. What if we could create a new kind of translation system? One that captures both the words and the emotions behind them? Commander Walsh looked intrigued. "How would that work?" Ben pulled out his tablet and began sketching a design. "We combine standard word translation with emotional analysis. Kira's species is naturally gifted at reading emotional content in sound. My species is good at understanding language patterns. If we work together, we might be able to create something new." Kira made excited musical sounds, and Ben could tell she loved the idea. "We would need to test this with real communication problems," Ambassador Vex said thoughtfully. Dr. Reef raised a tentacle. "The Healing Arts Exchange failure would be a perfect test case. We have recordings of all the original negotiations." Ben and Kira spent the next 2 weeks working on their new communication system. They listened to recordings of the failed negotiations and discovered that the problems had been even worse than anyone realized. When the Andorian ambassador had said they wanted to share healing knowledge generously, they meant they wanted to give freely without expecting anything in return. But the word generously had been translated simply as in large quantities. The other species thought the Andorians wanted to trade large amounts of medical information. When the Squeakin representative had said they were eager to learn, their tone had conveyed deep respect and humility. But the translator had made it sound like they were demanding immediate access to all medical secrets. Every single misunderstanding came from lost emotional context, Ben explained to Commander Walsh during a progress meeting. The aliens were actually in complete agreement, but the translations made them sound like they were making demands or setting conditions. Kira had been working on the technical aspects of their new system. Her natural ability to analyze sound frequencies allowed her to identify emotional markers that human technology had missed. She created a way to tag translated words with emotional context, marking them as hopeful, respectful, generous, or concerned. When they tested their new translation system on the old recordings, the difference was remarkable. Instead of cold, mechanical exchanges, the conversations became warm and cooperative. The true intentions of each species came through clearly. "This is revolutionary," Commander Walsh said after seeing the test results. "You have not just solved a translation problem, you have created a new way for species to understand each other." But their success was interrupted by urgent news. The Grand Alliance Summit, a gathering of 23 different species, was in serious trouble. Representatives had been meeting for 5 days, but instead of creating new partnerships, old misunderstandings were getting worse. "The summit is our most important diplomatic event," Commander Walsh explained. "If it fails, it could set back interspecies relations by decades. Some species are already talking about withdrawing from existing agreements." Ben felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "You want us to help save the summit?" "The summit leaders have agreed to let you demonstrate your new translation system," Commander Walsh said. "But Ben, many of these beings have been diplomats for longer than you have been alive. They will not trust new methods easily. That evening, Ben and Kira prepared for the biggest challenge of their careers. They sat in their shared quarters, testing their equipment one final time. "Are you nervous?" Ben asked Kira. Her musical response was honest, she was both nervous and excited. Ben felt the same way. "We have discovered something important," Ben said. "But discovery and application are different things. Tomorrow, we have to prove that emotional communication can work in real diplomatic situations." Kira made a gentle, supportive sound that reminded Ben of his grandmother's lullaby. Without thinking, he began humming the tune, and Kira joined in with her harmonies. As their music filled the room, Ben felt his nervousness fade. Their partnership had started with music, and music had taught them everything they knew about real communication. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we will face it together," Ben said. Kira's response was a complex musical piece that conveyed determination, friendship, and hope. Even though Ben did not understand every nuance, he understood the most important part: they were true partners now. The next morning, Ben and Kira entered the Grand Alliance Summit Chamber. The room was enormous, with seating areas designed for species of every size and shape. Flying beings perched on platforms near the ceiling. Aquatic beings sat in water-filled sections. Ground-dwelling species occupied traditional chairs and cushions. The atmosphere was tense and frustrated. Ben could see small groups of beings clustered together by species, avoiding interaction with others. Translation devices buzzed constantly, but instead of facilitating communication, they seemed to be creating more confusion. At the center of the room stood a raised platform with advanced recording and projection equipment. This was where Ben and Kira would make their demonstration. Distinguished representatives, Commander Walsh announced, Specialist Torres and Kira of the Zephyrian Empire will now demonstrate a new approach to interspecies communication. Ben felt hundreds of eyes, sensors, and other perception organs focusing on them. Some beings looked curious, others seemed skeptical, and a few appeared openly doubtful. "Honorable representatives," Ben began, "over the past few weeks, my partner and I have discovered that many of our communication problems are not caused by language differences. They are caused by emotional misunderstandings." A being with crystalline features and a voice like breaking glass spoke up. "Young human, we have been using translation technology for decades. Are you suggesting we have been doing it wrong?" Ben felt Kira's encouraging presence beside him. "I am suggesting that we have been doing it incompletely. May I show you what I mean?" Ben asked for a volunteer to help with a demonstration. After some hesitation, a tall being with feathered wings agreed to participate. This was Ambassador Skyweaver from the Etherian Collective. "Ambassador, please tell me about something you care about deeply, using your natural language and emotional expression," Ben said. Skyweaver spoke in a language that sounded like wind through trees. Their tone was passionate and their wings moved gracefully as they talked. Even though Ben did not understand the words, he could feel the love and dedication in their voice. "Now, please repeat the same message using your translation device," Ben requested. This time, Skyweaver's passionate speech became, "Home planet environmental preservation represents important policy priority for current administration." The difference was so dramatic that several beings made sounds of surprise or recognition. "The translator gave us the facts," Ben explained, but it lost the heart of the message. Ambassador Skyweaver was not just stating a policy, they were sharing something they loved deeply. Kira began to make musical sounds, and Ben activated their new translation system. Instead of a mechanical voice, the system produced words that carried emotional tags. Kira says she understands the ambassador's passion, tone, respectful, supportive, and asks if they would like to share more about their beautiful world, tone, curious, admiring. Skyweaver's feathers ruffled with pleasure. They spoke again in their natural language, this time with even more emotion. The new translation system converted their words while preserving the joy and pride. "Our world has crystal forests that sing in the wind, tone, wonder, love. We protect them because they are the voice of our ancestors, tone, reverent, determined." Around the chamber, beings began to respond to Skyweaver's emotional communication. Their body language became more open and interested. Several beings made sounds or gestures that clearly indicated approval and understanding. "This is remarkable," said Dr. Reef, whose tentacles were swaying in rhythm with Skyweaver's passionate words. "I feel like I am hearing Ambassador Skyweaver for the first time." Ben and Kira spent the next hour working with different representatives, demonstrating how emotional context could transform communication. They revisited some of the disagreements that had been causing problems at the summit and discovered that most were based on misunderstood intentions rather than real conflicts. When a small, timid being had said they required assistance, the translation had made it sound like a demand. But with emotional context, everyone could hear that they were making a humble request for help, not demanding special treatment. When a large, powerful being had offered to provide security, the translation had made other species nervous about military threats. But with emotional tags, everyone could hear that the offer came from genuine care and a desire to protect others. By the end of the demonstration, the atmosphere in the chamber had completely changed. Beings who had been avoiding each other were now engaged in animated conversations using the new translation system. The chamber filled with sounds of laughter, musical exchanges, and friendly chatter. Specialist Torres and Kira, announced the lead moderator, a wise-looking being with silver skin and kind eyes, "You have given us a gift that goes beyond improved translation. You have shown us how to truly hear each other." But even as Ben felt pride in their success, he knew their work was just beginning. The real test would come when these beings returned to their home worlds and tried to implement emotional communication on a larger scale. As the formal session ended and beings began to gather in smaller groups to continue their conversations, Ben noticed something wonderful happening. Species that had never interacted before were finding common ground through emotional understanding. The chamber was beginning to sound like a symphony of interspecies harmony. Kira made a complex musical statement that their new system translated as, "This is only the beginning," tone, excited, hopeful. "True understanding requires practice and patience," tone, wise, encouraging. "But we have proven it is possible," tone, confident, joyful. Ben smiled as he watched the continuing conversations around them. "You are right, Kira. We have started something important here. Now we need to help it grow." Their demonstration had been successful beyond their wildest hopes, but Ben could sense that even bigger challenges lay ahead. 3 months after the Grand Alliance Summit, Ben Torres stood in a room he had never imagined would exist. The newly constructed Interspecies Communication Center on Harmony Point buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of worlds worked together using the emotional translation system he and Kira had developed. The center was unlike any building Ben had ever seen. The architecture combined elements from many different worlds, flowing Andorian curves mixed with geometric Terran lines and organic Zephyrian crystal formations. The air itself felt different, filled with the gentle harmonics that Kira's people used to promote peaceful feelings. "The morning reports are ready," said Dr. Reef, approaching Ben with several data tablets balanced on their tentacles. Dr. Reef had become the center's chief researcher, studying how emotional communication affected interspecies relationships. Ben accepted the tablets and began reading. The results still amazed him every day. Since the summit, 47 different species had adopted emotional translation systems. Trade negotiations that had been stuck for years were suddenly moving forward. Scientific research projects were forming between species that had never worked together before. "Look at this," Ben said, showing one report to Dr. Reef. "The Crystalline Collective has agreed to share their mineral extraction technology with the Earth colonies. 6 months ago, they would not even speak to human representatives." "That is not the most surprising news," Dr. Reef replied, their tentacles moving in what Ben had learned was excitement. "The Zephyrian Empire announced this morning that they are opening their borders for the first time in 3 centuries. They want to establish cultural exchange programs with 12 different species." Ben felt a surge of pride and amazement. When he had first met Kira, the Zephyrians had been one of the most isolated species in the galaxy. Now they were becoming leaders in interspecies cooperation. Where is Kira now? Ben asked. She is in the Harmony Chambers with Ambassador Skyweaver and the new representatives from the Quantum Syndicate, Dr. Reef answered. They are working on establishing the first interspecies music academy. Ben made his way through the center's corridors toward the Harmony Chambers. Along the way, he passed dozens of workstations where beings from different worlds were collaborating on projects that would have been impossible before emotional translation. A team of Terran engineers was working with Squeakin mathematicians to design new space navigation systems. The Squeakins' natural ability to process complex calculations combined perfectly with human engineering skills, but only now that they could understand each other's emotional motivations and concerns. In another area, Andorian healers were teaching their medical techniques to a group of students from 6 different species. The emotional translation system allowed the healers to convey not just the technical aspects of their methods, but the caring and compassion that made their healing so effective. Ben entered the Harmony Chambers and immediately felt the peaceful atmosphere that Kira and her team had created. The room was designed to enhance natural acoustics, and the walls were covered with resonating crystals from Kira's home world. Kira was at the center of the room, her crystalline body glowing softly as she worked with a group of beings to create what they called universal harmonies, musical pieces that could convey emotions clearly across species barriers. Ambassador Skyweaver was teaching the group how Etherian wind songs expressed different feelings. Their feathered wings moved gracefully as they demonstrated how wing movements added emotional context to their musical language. 3 beings from the recently contacted Quantum Syndicate were contributing sounds that Ben had never heard before, frequencies that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in another dimension. The effect was hauntingly beautiful. When Kira saw Ben enter, her body brightened with happiness. She made a musical greeting that needed no translation, the joy and welcome in her tones were perfectly clear. Ben! Ambassador Skyweaver called out, their wings rustling with excitement. You must hear what we have created. We have composed a piece that tells the story of first contact between our species. When beings hear it, they understand not just what happened, but how it felt to experience that moment of connection. The group performed their composition, and Ben felt tears forming in his eyes as he listened. The music told the story of fear transforming into curiosity, suspicion melting into wonder, and isolation giving way to friendship. Every being who listened would understand the emotional journey of species meeting each other for the first time. This is incredible, Ben said when the music ended. You are not just creating entertainment, you are creating empathy. One of the Quantum Syndicate representatives spoke in their strange, multidimensional language. The emotional translation system converted their words, music becomes memory, tone, wise, profound. When beings share emotional experiences through harmony, tone, connected, unified, understanding grows beyond simple knowledge, tone, amazed, hopeful. Ben realized that something far more important than improved communication was happening. The beings working together were not just learning to understand each other's words, they were beginning to feel each other's emotions. Empathy was spreading across species barriers in ways no one had thought possible. His tablet chimed with an incoming message from Commander Walsh. Torres, report to Command Center immediately. Priority 1 communication from Earth. Ben excused himself and hurried to the Command Center, wondering what could be so urgent. When he arrived, Commander Walsh was standing in front of a large communication screen showing the image of Admiral Chen, the head of Terran Defense Force Operations. Specialist Torres, Admiral Chen said, congratulations on your remarkable work. The reports from Harmony Point have reached the highest levels of Earth government. Thank you, Admiral, Ben replied, unsure where this conversation was leading. The President has asked me to offer you a new position, Admiral Chen continued. We want to establish a permanent interspecies harmony council with full diplomatic authority. You would head this organization and report directly to the United Earth government. Ben felt shocked. Admiral, I am honored, but I am just a communications specialist. I have never run a major organization. Mr. Torres, Admiral Chen said with a smile, you have accomplished something that our best diplomats could not achieve in decades of trying. You have created genuine understanding between species that had given up on cooperation. That makes you exactly the right person for this job. Commander Walsh stepped forward. Ben, this position would give you the authority and resources to expand emotional communication throughout the galaxy. You could establish training centers on multiple worlds and develop new technologies to help species understand each other better. Ben thought about the amazing transformations he had witnessed over the past few months. Species that had been enemies were becoming allies. Beings who had been isolated were joining the galactic community. All because they could finally understand each other's hearts as well as their words. What about Kira? Ben asked. This work would not be possible without her. Zephyrians understand emotional communication in ways that humans never could. That has been arranged as well, Admiral Chen said. The Zephyrian Empire has agreed to make Kira a permanent cultural ambassador. More importantly, the Earth government is prepared to offer her something unprecedented, full Terran citizenship. She would be the first non-human to receive this honor. Ben felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. I need to discuss this with Kira before making any decisions. Of course, Admiral Chen agreed. Take the time you need. But Mr. Torres, I hope you understand how important this work is. What you and Kira have started could change the future of our galaxy. After the communication ended, Ben sat quietly for several minutes thinking about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, he had been a simple communication specialist whose biggest worry was whether his translation equipment would work properly. Now he was being offered the chance to lead an organization that could transform how every species in the galaxy related to each other. He found Kira still in the Harmony Chambers, but now she was working alone, creating soft melodies while she organized data on her tablet. When Ben entered, she looked up with a questioning expression. We need to talk, Ben said, sitting beside her. Something big has happened. Ben explained the offer from Earth government and watched Kira's crystalline features change as she processed the information. Her musical responses grew more complex as she thought through the implications. They want to make you a Terran citizen, Ben said. You would be the first non-human to receive that honor. But it would also mean spending most of your time away from your home world. Kira's response was a long, intricate musical piece that conveyed many different emotions: excitement, nervousness, hope, and determination. Even though she did not use the translation system, Ben understood her meaning clearly. You think this is what we are meant to do, Ben said. You think we can really change how the galaxy works? Kira nodded and made a gentle sound that reminded Ben of their first musical collaboration. She was reminding him of how their partnership had started, with a simple song that had revealed the power of emotional connection. Over the next week, Ben and Kira visited different areas of Harmony Point to see how emotional communication was affecting daily life. What they discovered convinced them that accepting the new positions was not just an opportunity, it was a responsibility. In the medical centers, doctors from different species were working together with unprecedented effectiveness. Zephyrian healers could sense emotional blockages that were preventing healing. Human surgeons could explain complex procedures in ways that other species understood intuitively. Andorian medicine specialists could share their deep knowledge while conveying the wisdom that came with centuries of experience. In the research laboratories, breakthrough discoveries were happening almost daily. When scientists could understand not just each other's data, but their passion and curiosity, collaboration reached new levels. A joint team had just announced the development of faster-than-light communication technology that combined principles from 7 different species. In the cultural centers, art forms were emerging that no single species could have created alone. Paintings that incorporated Terran visual techniques, Etherian movement patterns, and Zephyrian harmonic resonance. Stories that blended the mathematical precision of Squeakin narrative with the emotional depth of human literature and the philosophical wisdom of Andorian thought. But perhaps most importantly, in the education centers, young beings from different species were growing up together in ways their parents had never imagined possible. Children were learning that diversity was not something to fear or barely tolerate, it was something to celebrate and cherish. Ben watched a group of youngsters from 8 different species playing a game that combined elements from all their worlds. They communicated in a mixture of words, musical tones, visual signals, and emotional expression that created perfect understanding between them. "Look at them," Ben said to Kira. "They are growing up truly understanding each other. When they become adults, they will create a galaxy we can barely imagine." Kira's musical response was filled with wonder and hope. She was imagining a future where interspecies conflict was as rare as communication failures had become at Harmony Point. Ben made his decision. "We have to accept these positions. Not for ourselves, but for them," he said, gesturing toward the playing children. 2 months later, Ben stood in the Great Assembly Hall of the newly constructed Interspecies Harmony Council headquarters. The building was located on a small planet that had been designated as neutral territory, equidistant from the major species' home worlds. Representatives from 63 different species had gathered for the opening ceremony. The hall was designed to accommodate every type of being, with underwater sections for aquatic species, elevated platforms for flyers, and specially designed areas for beings with unique environmental needs. "Distinguished beings of the galaxy," Ben began, speaking into a communication system that would translate his words with full emotional context to every species present. 6 months ago, most of us could barely understand each other's basic meaning. Today, we gather as friends who understand not only each other's words, but each other's hearts. Kira stood beside him, her crystalline body glowing with happiness. She had been officially sworn in as a Terran citizen the previous week, in a ceremony that had been broadcast across dozens of worlds. The image of a human and a Zephyrian taking the oath of citizenship together had become a symbol of the new era of cooperation. "The Interspecies Harmony Council has 3 main goals," Ben continued. "First, we will establish communication training centers on 50 worlds within the next 2 years. Every being who wants to learn emotional communication will have the opportunity to do so." Enthusiastic sounds arose from the assembled beings, applause, musical tones, clicking sounds, and other expressions of approval that created a symphony of support. "Second, we will create harmony schools where young beings from different species can grow up learning together. These schools will prepare the next generation to build relationships we cannot yet imagine." Kira added her musical voice to Ben's announcement, explaining how the schools would use artistic and emotional education to help young beings develop natural empathy and understanding. "Third, we will establish the Galactic Harmony Network, a communication system that will allow beings anywhere in the galaxy to connect with full emotional understanding. Distance will no longer be a barrier to true communication." The response to this announcement was overwhelming. Beings who had spent their entire lives feeling isolated from other species began to realize that they would soon be able to connect with friends and colleagues across the galaxy with the same depth of understanding they shared with their own kind. After the ceremony, Ben and Kira walked together through the council headquarters, visiting the various departments that were already beginning their work. The Translation Development Center was creating new emotional communication systems for recently contacted species. The Conflict Resolution Department was helping species that had been in disagreement for decades find common ground. The Cultural Exchange Division was organizing programs that would allow beings to experience other worlds not just as tourists, but as temporary family members. "Do you remember when we first met?" Ben asked as they stood in the central garden, surrounded by plants from dozens of different worlds growing together in beautiful harmony. Kira made a musical sound that conveyed fondness and amazement. She was remembering their first awkward attempts at communication and comparing them to the deep partnership they now shared. "I was so worried about whether the translation equipment would work," Ben continued. "I never imagined that the equipment was the problem, not the solution." A group of young beings from the Harmony School ran past them, playing and communicating in the natural multi-species language that was developing among children who grew up with emotional communication. Their laughter and joy created a melody that needed no translation. "Look what we started," Ben said with wonder. Kira's response was a complex musical piece that spoke of gratitude, amazement, and deep friendship. But underlying all of that, Ben could hear something else, a sense of purpose and destiny fulfilled. They had been brought together by a military assignment that neither of them had wanted. But their reluctant partnership had become something neither could have imagined, the foundation for a new era of galactic understanding and cooperation. As the sun set over the Harmony Council headquarters, Ben and Kira stood together listening to the sounds of dozens of different species working, learning, and building friendships together. The future they were creating would be filled with challenges, but those challenges would be faced by beings who truly understood each other. Their bond had indeed altered everything, but in ways that went far beyond their original dreams. They had not just learned to communicate across species barriers, they had taught the galaxy how to build bridges of empathy that would last for generations. The Harmony Revolution had begun, and its music would echo across the stars for centuries to come.